Hi guys and happy Friday. Today we're going to finish the Civil War Part 1. All right, we're going to go over two major battles. But before we start, I wanted to remind you of where we left off. We left off with the Anaconda Plan, which remember it was a three-part plan. Let's see if you guys can remember it. Number 1 was to blockade the southern ports so they cannot export or import any goods and they cannot make any money off of the cotton industry anymore. Number 2 was to travel down the Mississippi River and cut the Confederacy in half. To conquer, to divide is easier to conquer. And then number 3 was to capture the capital of the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia. All right, so that is the Anaconda Plan, and the first major battle after the Battle of Fort Sumter was the Battle of Bull Run, which was a very large shock to the Union because remember, the Union thought they could easily defeat the Confederacy, but because of that psychology behind why the soldiers of the Confederacy are fighting, they were not going down without a fight. And the Battle of Bull Run was a huge upset to the Union because they lost a ton of soldiers and it was a huge bloody mess. All right, so after the Battle of Bull Run, what's going to happen is Lincoln is actually going to call for 500,000 more men to join the Union Army. And the Union Army is going to be led by General George McClellan and eventually Ulysses S. Grant, which is this guy right here. All right, you guys should know Ulysses S. Grant. He's currently on the $50 bill. He's going to be a future president. He's a West Point graduate, but in the beginning of his life, he was a huge failure. Actually, he failed at literally everything. It was a major fail for him. He failed at every job that he had before the Civil War. He tried his hand at farming, as a store clerk, as a bill collector and real estate agent, and he did terrible at all things. But he graduated from West Point. He was tough and brave, and he was a really good military commander. So he used the talents he did have in the Civil War. So this is where he's going to come into play. All right, Ulysses S. Grant is going to eventually capture two Confederate forts that are located in Tennessee. All right, he's going to capture Fort Donelson, and he's going to capture Fort Henry. Both of these are located on the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River. So what's going to eventually happen is the Confederate soldiers are going to fight back for their territory. The Union soldiers are going to be located near a small Tennessee church next to a town called Shiloh in Tennessee. And what's going to happen is the Confederate soldiers are going to surprise attack the Union forces. All right, they're going to surprise attack the Union forces while the Union forces are making coffee, and it's going to lead to over 100,000 troops to be killed at the Battle of Shiloh. The Battle of Shiloh is eventually going to be a draw. However, it's going to really change the way that this war is being fought. Because this is going to show that Union and Confederate forces alike cannot just, easily sleep and move around without some kind of fortifications, some kind of scouts and trenches to protect them while they are sitting and waiting for battle. So because of the Battle of Shiloh, after this, everywhere the Confederate and Union forces go, they are going to have scouts making sure that no army is coming close to them. They're going to dig trenches and they're going to create fortifications to make sure that, they cannot be attacked again by surprise, like the Union soldiers were during the battle. All right, the second battle that we're going to talk about is the Battle of the Ironclads. So if you remember last class, I talked about how the Union has a great navy. They have a very strong navy of over 250 ships ready to go. But the Confederacy, they have little to no ships at all. what's going to eventually happen is the Confederacy, they're going to take a ship that was burned by the Union Army that was being built. They're going to finish building it, and they're going to wage war on the sea. And this is going to be really the only attack on the sea by the Union and Confederacy. So guys, I'm going to be playing this video for you. Make sure you follow along because there are going to be questions based on this video.
This battle was the result of the Civil War's most important arms race. The Confederate Navy Secretary, Stephen Mallory, knew the North would establish a blockade all along the southern coast, so he called for a secret weapon, an iron warship that could take on all the wooden ones. But how to do it? No ironworks in the South could build an engine strong enough to power an all-metal ship, but up in the Norfolk, Virginia Navy Yard, there was the hull of a Union ship named the Merrimac that had been burned in a panic by the North when the Southern armies moved on the yard. Her huge engines were completely intact, and the South raised her and built on her hull a 140-foot-long metal fort holding 10 heavy guns. It hobbled the railway system of the entire Confederacy, but they had it built and floating by early 1862. The North got wind of what the South was up to and rushed to make its own ironclad. A brilliant Swedish-born inventor named John Ericsson had a revolutionary plan for a new kind of ship. It would be made completely of iron and have a revolving turret that would let it fire at an enemy no matter which way the ship was pointing. Ericsson called it the Monitor. And now Abraham Lincoln comes into the story. He liked Ericsson's idea and went along when it was pitched to the North's newly formed ironclad board. Without his support, the ship would probably never have been built. Ericsson had to build the most complex machine ever made at the time, and his contract gave him only 100 days to do it. The Monitor was bolted together in Brooklyn, and Ericsson made his deadline. Both sides knew they were in a race, and the Merrimac won. She steamed out from Norfolk into Hampton Roads on March 8th and made right for the frigate Cumberland, one of the most powerful ships in the Union Navy. The Yankee cannonballs bounced off the Merrimac's iron sides, and the rebel ship sank her in half an hour. The Merrimac went on to destroy another frigate. It was the U.S. Navy's worst defeat until Pearl Harbor, 80 years later. But the next morning, the Monitor was there. She'd had a horrible voyage down from Brooklyn, nearly sank twice on the way, and her crew hadn't slept for 48 hours when she got to Hampton Roads. But she steamed right in to meet the Merrimac. The two ships fought for 4 hours while 10,000 Union and Confederate troops watched from the shore. Then the Union skipper was wounded, and the Monitor briefly withdrew. The Merrimac thought she was retreating and headed for home. Both sides later claimed victory. But the fact is that the Union blockade still stood, and the Merrimac never fought again. The battle helped save the Union. If the Merrimac had broken the blockade, England might well have come in on the side of the Confederacy. And no battle ever changed the naval world so fast and so completely. Every other navy on Earth realized that their ships were obsolete. A few weeks later, the British Navy halted construction on all its wooden warships, and a 2,000-year-old tradition came to an end. Ericsson's inventions, his metal ship, its revolving turret, will be with us for decades, perhaps centuries to come.
Okay guys, great job with week 1 of online learning. Make sure you turn in everything to me so I can get your grades in. Keep up the good work, stay safe and healthy.